Hello, is this thing on? Can you hear me in the back? Yeah? We're good? Okay, I won't be talking for long. Welcome. Glad to see that all of you could join me here after that midterm yesterday. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Marvin. I'm one of the TAs for this class, but I will not be lecturing today. Instead, I will just be showing you a video about user interfaces as explained by the great computer scientist Alan Kay. John is not here today because he and the other TAs are off busy grading your midterms, and there are no updates as of right now, but they will be available on Piazza soon. So with that, I will stop talking, and you can sit back, relax, and enjoy User Interfaces by Alan Kay.
Thank you. This is a talk about the only computer most of us ever see, the one that's acted out on the stage of the screen, called the user interface design. User interface, in many ways, is a second stage of development after the operating system, because the operating system, as we all know, was a layering of software that tried to turn a sometimes poorly designed machine into one that was more fruitful for the software environment. The user interface tries to do the same thing. It tries to design a special kind of machine that's very understandable, very efficient for the person who uses it without removing any of the things that the machine can actually do. And this talk is too short to include all of the people that contributed to user interface over the years. I'm just going to pick out a few that particularly struck me along the way and illustrate it by means of examples. So in order to get started, let's go back 25 years to what must seem like the Pleistocene age for most people in universities today, to the dawn of some very important ideas. And first was the very first personal computer, which you see on the slide here. This is a machine called the Link. It was designed at Lincoln Labs in 1962 by Wes Clark, and it's my vote for the first personal computer ever done. You see it has a display and a keyboard, and it has some funny little things that look like deck tapes, but were actually originally designed for this machine. And one of the design criteria for this machine was it was supposed to be small enough on the desk so that a person could see over it. So one of the ideas is that this machine should not be intimidating. And about 2,000 of these were built in the 60s, mostly for biomedical technicians who didn't have a mainframe at their disposal and didn't want to hire programmers to use it. They wanted something that they could build, set up experiments themselves, do their own programming. And remarkably, a very large number of the original 2,000 are still in use today, 25 years later. The reason is that, among other things, nervous systems of animals haven't sped up in those years, and so a computer that worked very well back then for doing neurological experiments works very well today. Something else was happening at Lincoln Labs in 1962, and that was the invention of computer graphics. Ivan Sutherland's Sketchpad, probably the most significant single thesis ever done, a remarkable program in many ways even today, as we'll see by looking at this tape. This tape is from the very first movie of Sketchpad, taken in the summer of 1962. So this is 25 years old. Rubber bands you're familiar with, but look at what he's doing. He's pointing at the edges and saying, I want them to be all mutually perpendicular, and Sketchpad just figured out how to do that. Sketchpad is the first system to ever have a window. He's actually drawing on a virtual sheet of paper about 1/3 of a mile on a side. And again, to get something he wants, he simply sketches it in roughly and then gives rules like be parallel and perpendicular, and Sketchpad figures out and solves the problems. Here the rule is collinearity, so that the dashes lie directly over the guidelines below. The Sketchpad was able to solve very complicated problems in real time involving both linear and nonlinear systems of constraints. So it was the first non-procedural programming system and considerably more powerful than the spreadsheets of today. So he's made a hole in the flange, continuously zooms back. Now he wants to make a rivet, and again we see why it's called Sketchpad. He just draws a rough shape, uses the center of the crossbar there as the center of the arc, and then points to the edges and says, I want these to be mutually perpendicular again. Solving that forces the crossbar to change, which forces the arc to change, which gives you a perfectly symmetrical rivet. And he shows that no matter how you distort it, when he turns the problem solver on, it will come up with a symmetrical solution. And he could have made it more complicated. He could have constrained the side lengths to be ratios of each other, or tied to some other drawing in the environment. Now, another important idea seen here for practically the first time is that of master drawings and instances. He was working on a master drawing, and what he has here now is an instance of that. The instance can be rotated and scaled and positioned. So he's going to insert the rivet in the hole. By the way, the Sketchpad was the first system in which it was definitely discovered that the light pen is a very bad input device. So the blood runs out of your hand in about 20 seconds and leaves it numb. And in spite of that, it's been reinvented at least 90 times in the last 25 years. Here's another instance of the rivet, another one. Now, display is jumping around like that because they didn't even really have computer displays back then. The TX2 is putting up every dot by brute force. He didn't like the cross pieces, so he goes to the master drawing, makes them transparent. Lo and behold, we see dynamically that the rivets, the instance rivets, have felt that change. So Sketchpad is also the first object-oriented software system. I once asked Ivan Sutherland, how could you possibly have done the first interactive graphics program, the first non-procedural programming language, the first object-oriented software system all in 1 year? He said, well, I didn't know it was hard. There's nothing like this before. And here he's showing that every instance that you make of something, every master can create instances. So he's making a bunch of copies of the hole in the flange. Now, I'd like to tell you where you could go to buy a system as good as Sketchpad, but I don't know where, because there isn't anything like it even on the market today 25 years later. It was a one-of-a-kind thing. It ran on a machine much larger than the studio that I'm recording the talk on. In fact, it was the last computer large enough to have its own roof in the United States. That mammoth machine had all of 460K bytes and executed about 400,000 instructions per second, which meant that this machine, this supercomputer of 25 years ago, was about the size of a 512K Macintosh. So what you saw there on the screen could be done on any of the desktop computers today, but nobody is doing it. Something we should think about just why. Now, moving ahead just a couple of years, we see another pioneer, Douglas Engelbart, the fellow who invented the mouse, the black-on-white display, and the first person to successfully implement hypertext, something that everybody is talking about today. And he did something else that was almost obscene even by today's standards. He actually went and studied his users. So he would poke around in people's offices and see the way people actually worked in offices. And he discovered something funny, that even after 16 years of schooling, that people wouldn't sit hunched over their desks the way they'd been taught. Think of it, a tremendous failure in American education. 16 years of being taught to sit hunched over a desk, and people would still scoot around in their office chairs and put their feet up on their desk and so forth. And Engelbart said, well, why the heck should we make people hunch over their desks to use their personal computers? Why not build something into the, in this case, it's a lap board that's built into the arm of the chair, so as the person moves around the room and does all the things they're used to doing with their chair, he is able to also use his computer navigation equipment. Here's an example of Engelbart's system as of about 20 years ago, in a live demonstration from San Francisco. He is sitting in San Francisco in an auditorium with about 3,000 people, and his group and the machines and the rest of the paraphernalia are in Menlo Park, about 35 miles away.
The program that I'm going to describe to you is quickly characterizable by saying, if in your office you as an intellectual worker were supplied with a computer display backed up by a computer that was alive for you all day and was instantly responsive, instantly responsive to every action you had, how much value could you derive from that? Well, this basically characterizes what we've been pursuing for many years in what we call the Augmented Human Intellect Research Center at Stanford Research Institute. So look what else we can do in here. I've got this file that's structured. If I want to see what's in there, I can walk down the hierarchy levels and see, or return. But there's another thing I can do. There's a root I said I have here. So here, I'm afraid I'll need a different picture of the view. So here's what I drew with a picture drawing capability here. It's a slight map if I start from work, and here's the route I seem to have to go to pick up all the materials. And that's my plan for getting home tonight. But if I want to, I can say, the library, what am I supposed to pick up there? I can just point to that. And oh, I see, overdue books and all. Well, there was a statement there with that name on it. Go back. What am I supposed to pick up at the drugstore? I see, very interesting. All right. Mark it. Oh, I've already seen that. Rather slow like that. Gee, that's too much. Anyway, so we have this feature of structuring our material hierarchically, being able to move around it very well. When we get a hierarchy, such as I can show you here now, I can do things if I want to just say, I'd like to interchange produce and canned materials. Bingo. And they're all numbered rightly if I care to look. Interchanging them very quickly. Cans are going to get interchanged with produce. They do it and all gets renumbered. So I have ways of studying over, making different views, moving around, going to specified points, and modifying the structure. At the same time, I've seen that I have a repertoire of different entities, like character, knock off that character, replace the character, make that P. So I have entities of all sorts that I can say I want to do operations on, and this basic structure that I can move over and study and get about very quickly. So that is the essence now. That's the essence of the tool we have. There are a lot of details that I've left out for you. I'd like to link to Bill, and I don't know what his terminal is right now, so I have to ask for somebody to connect me to him audibly. So, Bill, will you come in through this intercom?
Hello, Doug.
Hi. I need to know what terminal you're on, Bill.
13.
Okay. I'd like to have him see my text. And so this special thing, if I label 13, will switch over. So in his display, he sees my text. So I'll execute it. And sure enough, it does. But what's that running around? Well, if he's looking at my text, he'd like to have something to say about it. So we put on a marker, a tracking spot that he controls. So he's sitting in Menlo Park looking at this text, and he can point to it. But we've carefully reserved for me the right to control and operate on this. So my bug is more powerful than yours. But we can have an argument. Yeah. That's what they call a bug fight. So, all right. So, in case you haven't been listening, Bill, we've been going through lots of examples and setting up in collaboration here so that we can go on into information retrieval. And we've set up now audio coupling, and then we're both looking at the same display, and that'd be very handy to work. We could talk to each other and point, and maybe later I could hand you the chalk on this blackboard, like saying, here, you control it. But let's stay this mode now and add another feature that hardware-wise is available to the kind of display we have. I'd like to see you while I'm working on it. So before I can do that, I have to set up my display in a certain way. set it up so I see it over like that. That leaves a corner up there, and I say, now, computer, do the automatic switching that'll bring in a camera picture from the camera mounted on his console, such as the camera mounted on mine is. Hi, Bill. That's great. Now we're connected audio. You can see my work. You can point at it, and I can see your face, and we can talk. So let's do some collaborating.
Another thing that was going on at Lincoln Labs was the first iconic programming. It was done at RAND Corporation. The people who did the wonderful interactive programming language JOS was done for economists and other non-computer specialists at RAND who had to compute. And one of their complaints about, their only complaint about JOS was they said, hey, none of us can type. Can't you do something about that? So that led to the invention of the first data tablet. It was called the RAND tablet back then. And this system, from about 1968, called GRAIL, for Graphical Input Language.
This list of processes takes us back to the topmost level, where we may start to edit the flow diagram.
No keyboard whatsoever.
First, we erase a flow arrow, then move the connector out of the way so that we may draw a box in its place.
We recognized he wanted a box and made one.
The printing
Now it's
in the box
recognizing
is
his
being
hand printing.
used as commentary only in this case. The box is slightly too large.
Wants to change the
so we
size of the
change
window.
its size.
Here's where Macintosh window control came from, literally.
Then draw a flow from the connector to the box. Attach a decision element to the box and draw a flow from it to scan.
Notice that every
We then
command
erase the flow
is
arrows
not just
attached to the
iconic, but
process,
also analogic.
place a new area, and move
By
the
that I
box to a
mean
new position.
that it looks like the thing that you want. So if you want to scrub something out, you
This
scrub it
allows us
out.
to draw a
If you
new
want to
box.
draw a box, you just draw a box. It recognizes you want one, makes one the same size.
chop off its
Off a corner.
And label it subscan.
You want characters, you just make characters, and it recognizes those. There are no menus to reach to. You're always looking directly at where you're working. Now notice it missed the N at the end of subscan there.
Draw a
He saw it,
flow
he hesitated,
from
but it's
post to
the world's
subscan.
first modeless system,
Correct the
so he's
label.
able to just go and change it without
Every
issuing any
decision
more
on
commands.
subscan so that
You
control
see every
will flow
command
to
that's
the
actually
connector
being issued, and
A0.
they're all in the form of direct
Then
action.
complete the diagram from scan to post.
What a remarkable system that was. And when I saw that, I felt, and used it for a half an hour in 1968, I felt like I was sticking my hands right through the display and actually touching the information structures directly. This is the first system I'd ever used, and practically the only one since that I'd call truly intimate. And it was this degree of intimacy that is so important in a user interface. I used to show this movie to my group at Xerox PARC every 3 months or so we wouldn't forget what we're trying to do. Next envisionment of this was a little system we called Minicom, and this was the summer of 1971. And we went to a considerable direction in thinking about making this. And then we also did some dynamic animation, as we'll see in a minute. Space War had a very important part in the design of things because it was a conceptually simple precursor of all the video games we know today. It should be something that a child could write for himself. And we started working on Smalltalk, an object-oriented language based on Simula, but also with a lot of look back to what Sketchpad. Then all of this led to the Alto computer, built mostly by Chuck Thacker at Xerox PARC, the first workstation, and led to all of the subsequent workstations, and it also led directly to the Lisa and the Macintosh at Apple. We used an improved version of Engelbart's mouse, and in its early stages we call it the Interim Dynabook. We brought lots of children into PARC to work on these machines, and then we took the machines down into the Palo Alto schools, working with several hundred children in all. Here we are at Jordan Junior High School around 1976. Now let's take a look at animated versions of some of the things that ran on this machine and some of the things that the children did. So here's the famous Dynabook model, and back then we wanted it to be like the Hewlett-Packard calculator, except to be a real live computer. This was the inspiration for all that we were thinking about as what it was going to be like. Here's Ben Law's font editor being used to make an A in Lydian cursive. Most of these are taken from home movies we shot with a 16mm Bolex. Here's the painting program. This is something I designed in the summer of 1972, and Steve Purcell implemented it. Here you see some hand character recognition. It recognized the letter C as a command for drawing circles. That was put in by John Schock. We were experimenting with this at the time. Here's an L for drawing lines. One of the nice things about hand character recognition is that you don't have to move very far to hit something. Here's a D for drawing, which fires up the painting program, and I think you can see it has most of the features of the well-known Mac Paint on the Macintosh. The idea of actually being able to fashion your brushes right in the combination of canvas and palette itself was something that Purcell thought up, I think. The idea of having charcoal and airbrush effects was something that was also added at the very beginning of this program, putting in specular reflections. Here's an example of making a little brush, a bunch of different dots, pick it up, and you get some charcoal effects. Here's some experiments with the very first experiments with windows, dragging them around by one corner, opening their size at the other corner, just like on the Mac today. Making another one by going up to the upper right-hand corner, typing something in it, clipping the stuff that's inside. So I think this was the very first actual test, although we, of course we knew Windows were going to work because there had been examples of Windows before, but this is the very first test of them on a bitmapped display and some experiments with the user interface, what they might be like to just manipulate them. The Alto is actually a very powerful computer. If you could get to its microcode directly, we could. And the Alto is able to animate about 120 square inches of graphics in multiple planes. So you could do very complex 2.5D animation effects. And this is something done by Purcell, I think, around the end of 1973. And that was really the machine we thought we had. It was a machine that you could animate everything on it. Tying all that stuff together with Smalltalk, we got a number of interesting things with the kids. Here's one of the second level classes. This was a 13-year-old teaching 12-year-olds. And Marion had done one of the very first tools in Smalltalk the year before when she had learned it. And she was a very outgoing, ebullient young lady, and she wanted to teach a class. And so we brought in, we had 5 machines at the time, so we had 5 children, and we videotaped all of the 100 hours of it. And here's an example. This is from 1975 of a program that looks very much like MacDraw. It's an object-oriented graphics illustrator. You can select by means of selection handles. You can change colors. You can change the size. So the menu is being used on the lower right hand there, and the feedback is coming in the window in the center. And the only thing that's really interesting about this program is, besides that it was done in 1975, which is before you could buy it in a store, is it was actually conceived, designed, and implemented by a 12-year-old girl after only a few months of programming in Smalltalk. It took her about 2 weeks to do this, and the size of the program in Smalltalk 72 was about a page long. So part of our aim here was not just to get people to be able to access things by means of the windows, but also to be able to do the equivalent of writing short essays and having them have great effect. And one of the things that is disturbingly true about most novices on computers is that about 2 pages of program is the maximum they can handle. They like to be able to spread it out, use their visual field as an extension of their short-term memory. Here's another example. A 15-year-old boy, again after a few months of programming in Smalltalk 72, he was interested in ham radio, but really had gotten bored with the tedium of drawing radio diagrams, so he decided to make himself a ham radio illustrator, and has some quite sophisticated features. You see here a pop-up menu with often used things like open and closed dots, and he has a more extensive menu of iconic shapes for the circuits down below, so he can pick up a battery symbol and rotate it and put it in. This was also done in 1975, and it's one of my favorite programs done by a child, because less than 10 years before this, a PhD had been awarded for a system that wasn't as good. This program is about 80 lines of code long in Smalltalk 72. And now I want to go and focus on why this stuff works and how we came to some of these design decisions. Of course, some of it was just haphazard and random. Some of it we rationalized after the fact. But some of it we actually thought it through and were able to use stuff that had been done before. So to give you an idea of how difficult it is to understand how the mind works, let's take a look at this slide and see if we can see what's wrong with it. If you look at it for a while, you'll see that the mouth is somehow upside down. And maybe the eyes, something wrong with the eyes. Maybe they're upside down too. And if I were teaching in a school and trying to teach you about what had been done with this slide, I would say an English sentence like the following. I'd say, well, here we've taken a slide of a young girl, extracted her eyes and mouth, and put them back in with an airbrush, and then turned the entire slide upside down. That's an English sentence. And now that I've said that, you can understand everything about what it looks like when I turn it right side up. Now, I've given this talk many times, and I'm going to have to move it backward because I've discovered nobody will listen to me when that slide is on. And from the many times I've given the talk, I know that there were gasps in the classroom when you saw that picture because you weren't prepared for it, even though I told you everything about what had been done to it. Now, perceptual psychologists really love when something like this happens, because it means that information going in through one channel, the auditory channel to your language processing centers, elicited one kind of response to my sentence, and when you saw the actual picture through your visual channel, it elicited a completely different response. And this is actually understood physiologically as well as psychologically. On the under right-hand side of your brain, where you do face recognition, there are 2 pieces of brain tissue about an inch apart. One of them is an expert at faces. It's a thing that allows you to see faces in clouds, the thing that scares children in twilight. They see menacing shadows. And it's reporting right now, I see an upside-down face-like thing. Then about an inch away is another piece of brain tissue that's an expert in eyes and mouth only. And it's saying, well, that's a good-looking mouth and those are okay eyes. There's very little dissonance between the reports of these 2 separate pieces of brain tissue. Now, when I go to this right-side-up version of the thing, the face recognition guy is saying, well, that's a right-side-up face-like thing. And the eyes and mouth guy is saying something is terribly wrong here. And you can imagine why nature might have arranged for you to be startled. Seeing a face like this up close might mean you're going to die in the next 10 seconds. And in fact, it is built into all mammals. Something that we don't learn but is in the mammalian nervous system. So if you try this on a dog, I suggest you pick a small one. So the basic idea here is that what we think of as the unitary I, the unitary I-ness of I, myself, and me, is really a multiple set of different mentalities that apparently came about during different evolutionary periods. The mentalities think differently. They don't communicate very well with each other. They're often in conflict, and only a few of them talk. So we're only aware of a few of them in what we call our consciousness. Most of what the other mentalities do we call our subconscious. But relegating everything to the subconscious is almost akin to mysticism. And in fact, there's a lot more to be learned about this area. And we got interested in three of these mentalities, first from the work of Jean Piaget. And Piaget said that he thought children and adults have a unitary mentality that goes through stages as the child matures. So Piaget said, first there is a doing stage where a hole is to dig it and an object is to grab it. Thinking is action in that stage. The child doesn't think ahead. He doesn't imagine the consequences of his action. He just does. Later on is the image stage, child of 5 or 6 or 7, who, for instance, when given a squat glass poured into a tall, thin glass, will say there's more water in the tall, thin glass. I think everybody is familiar with that experiment of Piaget's. And it's because the child is being dominated by the visual image. It looks like there's more water there, and so the visual logic says that there is. Then around 11 or 12, Piaget says that the child goes to a facts and logic stage, away from the immediacy of the visual environment, or at least in French children who are 11 and 12. There are less evidence that American children ever get into the facts and logic stage. Now, when we looked at Piaget's theory, it was interesting. What it seemed to say is that if the child is below the age of 5, say, you should only do muscular things, and if the child is in this age between, say, roughly 5 and 11, that you should do mostly visual things, and then above that you should do sort of symbolic things. And it just didn't come through with any ideas for us. But while reading about Piaget, we had found the work of Brunner, who was the American psychologist who was one of the persons to bring Piaget to the American public's attention. And Brunner had a more interesting theory, and it came about from experiments that he did to confirm what Piaget was talking about. So Brunner did the experiment, took the water in the squat glass and poured it into the tall, thin one. The child said, yes, there's more water in the tall, thin glass. Then Brunner did something that Piaget hadn't thought to do. Brunner then covered up the glass. And the child said, oh, but wait, there must be the same amount of water because where would it go? And then Brunner revealed the tall, thin glass, and the child said, oh, wait, no, look, there's more water. And Brunner covered it up again, and the child said, oh, there must be the same amount of water because where would it go? So if you have any 9-year-olds you'd like to torment, this is a good way to do it, because what Brunner was doing was jumping the child not from this mentality back to a previous stage, but he was showing, as he did in many experiments, the existence of multiple mentalities. So the child was normally visually dominant here, but if you occluded the visual field, then this fledgling symbolic mentality that was really going to be switched on in a stronger way later on could actually work. And from this, we got a lot of ideas. It suggested that there are ways of using some of these other mentalities. And we got some confirmation from some interesting work in the literature of creativity. One of them was by Jacques Hadamard, the famous French mathematician, who in the late stages of his life decided to poll his 99 buddies, the other who made up together the 100 great mathematicians and physicists on the earth, and he asked them, how do you do your thing? And they were all personal friends of his, so they wrote back depositions. And only a few out of the 100 claimed to use mathematical symbology at all, which was quite a surprise. All of them said they did it mostly in imagery or figurative terms. And an amazing 30% or so, including Einstein, were down here in the mud pies. Einstein's deposition said, I have sensations of a kinesthetic or muscular type. Einstein could feel the abstract spaces he was dealing with in the muscles of his arms and his fingers. So one way of interpreting Hadamard's diagram here is that genius is the ability to recapture childhood at will. That's sort of the Piagetian way of looking at it. But a stronger way is to look at it through Brunner's eyes and see that what is actually going on is that these very creative people are somehow able to be in contact with other mentalities that are going on all the time. Now, this is a better way of thinking about this than simply splitting things up into conscious and subconscious, or right brain and left brain. This notion that each one of these things evolved for a different reason and can do different kinds of logics is very important. And we'll see why in a second. Now, I'm going to give you the most graphic demonstration I know of this principle in action, of what it means to actually be able to teach directly to the mentality that's going to learn rather than trying to teach through an inappropriate channel. You see, the sad part of Hadamard's diagram is that every child in the United States is taught math and physics through this channel. The channel that almost no adult creative mathematician and physicist uses to do it. And that is really a shame. They use this channel to communicate, but not to do their thing. And much of our education is founded on those principles, that just because we can talk about something, there is a naive belief that we can teach through talking and listening. Now, this example I'm going to show is taken from a television show in 1975 on Harry Reasoner's television show on ABC. And he had read a book that apparently upset him called The Inner Game of Tennis, which basically said almost anybody can learn to play a decent game of tennis in just a single afternoon if you don't try too hard. And that had made him wonder, because he'd been trying to play tennis for many years. And so he sent an ABC news squad out to California to expose this charlatan. And what they did was to round up a number of people and get them to sign legal affidavits saying that they had never played tennis before. They took them all out in the court and picked the worst one, who happened to be a 55-year-old lady, 40 pounds overweight, 5'2", and a muumuu. And she had the muumuu because her deposition said that not only had she never played tennis, but she'd not even exercised in 20 years. So taking them all in the court, turning on the live TV cameras, they set a clock and said to Tim Galway, you have 20 minutes to teach her how to play tennis. Now let's look at this from the standpoint of user interface design. Because in every way, Tim Galway is the user interface of this interactive teaching situation we have. And let's see what he actually does.
I'm going to have Tim hit some
This
balls
has sound.
to me. And as the ball flies through the air, I want you just to watch it. In the very instant the ball hits the court, I want you to say bounce. In the very instant the ball hits the racket, I want you to say hit. So you just be saying bounce, hit. All you need to do is watch the ball. Okay?
Bounce.
The key of all the exercises in the inner game is to focus the mind's attention somewhere where it will not interfere with the body's ability to hit the ball automatically. You stand here and Tim will throw you a couple, and you just continue doing the same thing.
Should I try to hit it?
Not at first. At first, just say bounce when the ball bounces and hit when you would hit it, but don't hit it. Then after you feel like hitting it, go ahead and hit it.
Okay.
Now you might watch her right arm here.
Hit.
And
Bounce.
something's trying to hit that ball,
Bounce.
even though she was told that she didn't have to.
Bounce.
Now when she actually tries, she misses.
It says bounce. He's also out of the corner of his eye watching me hit the ball. So even though he's not trying to see how I hit it, the image of me hitting it is going right into his memory. You enjoying yourself?
Yeah, it's really fun.
You like that? Okay, here we go.
I love it.
The cardinal principle in any book written on tennis, about tennis, is to watch the ball. No tennis player really sees the ball enough. And the reason is they get bored. So I try to give them something to see in the ball that's interesting. So we watch the trajectory of the ball, the gracefulness of the line made by the ball as it flies through the air. Always it's the same. Put the mind somewhere where it can stay calm and not get you uptight, but relaxed and interested. Then the body does so beautifully, so beautifully. You might start listening to the ball, Molly. Listen to how it sounds on your racket. Hear that?
Yes.
Hear that one? What did that sound like?
Very dull.
It was like wood. That's how wood sounds. Keep listening and you'll hear the sound that you like pretty soon. Just listen to it. Okay, now listen on this side. Now the girl. Okay. Now feel where that racket is part of your arm. That's it. Just feel it. Don't try so hard. Let it happen. That's it. Do what's comfortable, Molly.
Every time I did start to think, things went wrong.
Just feel the pace.
When you just stop thinking, the body seems to know what to do.
Can you feel with your left hand where it is? How'd it go? Just in the back there. Feel it. Okay. Out.
Out.
Don't miss it. Sit. Come. Okay? Okay, that's your first point in tennis. Score is 15 love.
Fantastic.
Okay, Molly. No need for you to miss.
All of a sudden, everything became effortless. I was just sort of like floating along, and doing what came naturally, and I said, I'm playing tennis. It's really, really beautiful.
Have a clear idea of what you want. Then let it happen. Don't try too hard. I'm going to try to make you miss, Molly, because it's going on too long. So I'll just get a little bit harder. You just keep watching the ball. Keep watching it. They're rooting for you, Mom. Don't be distracted. Keep on that ball. Oh, that's fine. That's called tennis.
Well, when I saw that, I said something akin to holy cow, because I'd just seen something that I wouldn't have believed possible, and I realized that it applied very strongly to user interface design, that something really important was going on here. So I got Tim Gallway's book, The Inner Game of Tennis, and I read it, and a number of things that he said really stuck in my mind. First one was almost a cliche. He said, learning happens when attention is focused, but he was able to get something out of that, because if you don't have a good theory of learning, then you can still get it to happen by just helping the person focus. One of the ways you can help a person focus is by removing interference. And a lot of what you saw in that tape was a way of holding focus of the mentality that actually had to learn to play the tennis and removing interference from the mentality that likes to talk and make comments. Another thing that Tim said that's particularly stuck in my mind was, he said the problem with most theories of teaching is that the parts of the body you want to have learn don't understand English. So the part of your mentality that understands English doesn't play tennis, can't play tennis, can't do mathematics, it can't do music. What it can do is talk and comment. And so in general, for learning most things, it is good to find a way of short-circuiting that mentality that we think of as the I that always tries to take over. So the whole ideal of what we're trying to do here comes back to this question that I asked in the very beginning, and that is, what would a computer be if it were like a pencil? Can it be used by children? Well, yes, it can. Can it be used by adults? Yes, it can. How low can we go to childhood? Can we go into much, much, much lower than grade school? Here's an answer to that question. It's a tape I got from the woman who's my accountant. This is her daughter, aged 22 months, 2 months shy of her second birthday. And she's never lived in a world that wasn't densely populated with Macintoshes, because both her mother and father worked at home, and both of her mother and father had their own Mac. And in fact, when I found out the little girl was interested in computers, I gave her an Apple II, which she rejected. She wanted a Macintosh just like her folks. And she literally learned to use it by sitting on her mother's lap while her mother was working. So for this child, the Macintosh is not a piece of technology, but simply more material in the environment to manipulate. And though I don't believe in user surveys, the one I did do with this very young user is I discovered that she vastly preferred Macintoshes with installed hard disks. Now, given that she can use the mouse, and some people are surprised that she can without having to look at it, but in fact, it's something that everybody can use, it's not too surprising that she can hit visible menu commands in Mac Paint. So when I saw this, I was intrigued. I'd never seen a child this young interacting with a computer before, but I wasn't too overwhelmed until I saw what she did next. She wants a fresh sheet of paper, so she hits the close bar in the window. She saves her old drawing using the pop-up, and then she uses the pull-down to get herself a fresh sheet, and she's off and running again. And in fact, we discovered that she was about 70% literate. About 70% of the generic window commands that are found in any Macintosh application she is able to use, not just in a visual program like Mac Paint. So the answer is that this stuff is for all of us, and the reason it works is not because the goodness of computer science in it, although there is some there. The main reason it works is because for some reason we decided to study human beings and involve lots of human beings called children in our experiment and try and stay closely coupled to them for a number of years. And out of that came a bunch of ideas that could not have sprung just from technology alone. So if it weren't for the multiple mentality ideas of Brunner and the catalysis of Tim Galway's Inner Game of Tennis and a host of other sources like Suzuki's way of teaching children violin and others too numerous to mention, we never would have thought of these ideas and implemented them the way we did. I think a good way of ending this talk is with a Winston Churchill joke, which, all Winston Churchill jokes, he's at a party after a certain number of whiskeys, and no matter what happens, he's always in perfect command of the English language. And in this joke, it's rather early in the evening, and he's over in the corner drinking his scotch, and the hostess of the party comes over to him, terribly distraught, and says, "Mr. Churchill, I'm really upset. I just saw a famous Earl over here steal one of my silver salt shakers. What am I to do?" And Churchill thought for a minute and stuck his cigar in his mouth and went over to the Earl, and on the way he picked up a silver salt shaker and put it in his pocket. And when he got over to the Earl, he took it out and said, "I think we've been noticed. Perhaps we should put these back." So the moral of that, besides that being the reason we won World War II, the moral of that story is if you want people to go along with you, you have to involve them in the same conspiracy. And user interface design is a conspiracy that I hope more of you will get interested in. Thank you very much.